Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're doing a deep dive into, well, how we actually study the oceans and their resources. We're looking at a really interesting piece of research. It uses machine learning. The paper is titled, Narrow Lenses for Capturing the Complexity of Fisheries, a topic analysis of fisheries science from 1990 to 2016. The lead author is Syed.
Yeah, and this paper tackles a pretty significant paradox we see globally. I mean, look, over the last, say, 30 years, scientific output in fisheries has just exploded. You've got more papers, more journals, more people getting PhDs in this stuff.
Right, a huge increase in activity.
Exactly. But at the same time, the actual crisis in managing fisheries effectively, that seems to be just as bad as ever, maybe worse in some places.
So the science is booming, but the fish stocks, or at least our management of them, are often still struggling. That's the puzzle. And these authors, Syed and colleagues, they float an idea. Maybe part of the problem isn't a lack of research, but where that research is focused.
Precisely. Are we just doing more and more research on the same kinds of things, maybe components that aren't the most critical? Or is the science actually broadening its view to capture the whole complex picture?
And that's really the core question for you in this deep dive. Are we looking through narrow lenses?
To even start answering that, we have to be clear about what a fishery actually is. It's not just fish in the water. It's technically defined as a socio-ecological complex adaptive system. SICAS for short.
To guess. Okay. Sounds complicated. Break that down.
Well, it basically means there are two major interacting parts or dimensions.
Okay.
First, you've got the natural dimension. This is the stuff we usually think of first, right? The biology, the ecology. So the fish themselves, their populations, what they eat, what eats them.
Predators, prey, population dynamics.
Yeah, and also the abiotic stuff, water temperature, currents, nutrients in the water, habitat structure, all that natural science side.
Got it. Dimension 1, nature. What's dimension 2?
Dimension 2 is the human dimension. And this is, well, everything else. It's the people involved. The fishing communities, the companies, the institutions that set the rules.
Like quotas and regulations.
Quotas, regulations, enforcement, yeah. Plus the policies, the economics driving at all markets, prices, costs, and crucially, the behavior of all the human agents. That's the fishers, the managers, the scientists, even the consumers.
Okay, so a fishery is this intertwined system of nature and people. It's both.
It has to be both. And this is where the researchers' hypothesis comes in. They observe something pretty well known. Historically, most fisheries scientists, they come from biology backgrounds, marine biology, ecology, that sort of thing.
Makes sense. You study fish, you probably study biology.
Right. So given that background, the hypothesis was maybe the scientific literature, especially in the specialized fisheries journals, would heavily lean towards that natural dimension.
And therefore, the human dimension, the people, the economics, the rules would be what? Underrepresented.
Severely underrepresented. That was the prediction they set out to test.
Okay, so how do you test something like that? You can't just, like, skim a few journals.
No, definitely not. This is where their approach gets really interesting and pretty novel. They moved away from traditional literature reviews, where a person reads and categorizes things, which is sort of top-down.
Right, subjectively deciding what fits where.
Instead, they used a massive data set and a bottom-up machine learning method. The data set alone is kind of mind-boggling. 46,582 full-text articles.
Wow, nearly 50,000 papers.
Full text, published over 26 years, from 1990 right through to 2016. And these weren't just any papers. They were from 21 top-tier specialized fisheries science journals.
Okay, that's a huge chunk of the core literature. So what did they do with all that text?
They fed it into this machine learning model called latent dirichlet allocation, LDA. It's a type of probabilistic topic model.
LDA. Okay, maybe explain that a bit. How does it work?
Think of it like this. The paper gives a good analogy. Imagine all the words across all those thousands of documents are different colors. LDA is like a process that automatically looks for words that tend to show up together frequently.
Like finding clumps of the same color.
Sort of, yeah. It sees that words like, say, growth, mortality, and recruitment often appear near each other. It groups them statistically and says, okay, this group of co-occurring words represents a hidden or latent topic. Maybe it calls that topic population dynamics.
Ah, so the machine identifies the patterns of word usage across the whole literature.
Exactly. And it does this without a human telling it beforehand what the topic should be. It lets the literature itself reveal its underlying thematic structure. It's bottom-up, avoiding researcher bias in defining the categories.
That's clever. Okay, so they run this LDA model on nearly 50,000 papers. What topics did the literature itself say it was focused on?
The model spat out 25 distinct research topics, and they could group these into broader themes, things like aquatic organism biology, that was the biggest group with 11 topics. Then there were topics focused on specific species, habitats, modeling, management, fishing tech.
Pretty standard categories for fisheries science, sounds like.
Right.
But what about the hypothesis, the human dimension?
Well, this is where the results were pretty stark, just incredibly clear.
Okay.
Of those 25 distinct topics identified by the machine learning across all that literature, only one explicitly dealt with the human dimension of the fishery system.
Wait, say that again? 1 out of 25?
One, topic 25. They labeled it, appropriately enough, fisheries management.
Hold on. So this field, fisheries science, which studies a system formally defined as socio-ecological, a system where the whole point is managing human activity.
Right.
You're saying that based on this massive analysis, 24 out of 25 research topics essentially ignored the socio part.
Well, maybe not ignored entirely, but certainly didn't focus on it explicitly. If you look at the non-generic topics, 20 out of 22 were clearly about the natural dimension.
Wow. That's not just an imbalance. That feels like a completely different focus than the definition implies.
It really confirms that narrow lens idea in the title, doesn't it? The specialized literature seems heavily weighted towards the biology and the environment. Counting fish, understanding their habitat, designing better nets.
And much less on the people doing the fishing, the markets they sell to, the rules they follow or don't follow.
Precisely. The institutional side, the behavioral complexities, largely absent from the core topics.
But okay, play devil's advocate for a second. These are fisheries science journals. Maybe that's what they should be focusing on. The science part, the biology, the ecology. Why is this imbalance necessarily a problem, let alone a crisis?
That's a fair question. But think about why fisheries management often fails. Is it usually because our biological models are wrong? Sometimes, sure. But more often than not.
It's because people don't follow the rules.
Yeah.
Or the economics make it impossible.
Exactly. The biggest source of uncertainty, the thing that most often trips up management plans, isn't the fish biology. It's predicting human behavior. How will fishers react to a new rule? Will there be compliance? What are the economic pressures pushing them? Are the governing institutions even capable of enforcement?
Right.
So if, say, 95% of your research effort is laser-focused on refining the biological details and you're basically ignoring the social, economic, and institutional drivers, you're almost guaranteed to be blindsided. You'll design policies based on biological ideals that then crash against human realities.
Okay, I see. The narrow focus on the natural side means you're missing the factors that often determine success or failure in the real world.
That's the argument, and it reframes things. Look at the topics that use the word fishery or fisheries, most often the ones that seem most central to fisheries science. They were, number 1, fisheries management itself.
The single human dimension topic.
Right. Number 2, stock assessment classic biology modeling. And number 3, fishing gear, the technology.
So the field seems to see itself revolving around managing, assessing stocks, and the gear used.
Yeah, that appears to be the core identity reflected in the language. Now let's drill down into that one human-focused topic, fisheries management. Topic 25. If it's the only bucket for the entire human dimension, how much stuff is crammed in there?
It must be doing a lot of heavy lifting.
A huge amount.
Right.
The researchers actually did a sub-analysis just on the documents within that topic, and they found it contained at least 12 distinct subtopics.
12 subtopics within the one main human topic. Okay, what kind of things?
All sorts. You had specific management approaches like co-management, quota systems, the precautionary approach. You had economic concepts, markets, bioeconomics, even the blue economy idea. And you had descriptions of fishery types like small-scale fisheries or recreational fisheries.
Wow, so institutional design, economic, sociology, community structure, all mashed together under the single heading of fisheries management.
That's what the analysis suggests. Compared to the fine-grained detail in the 11 different topics just on aquatic organism biology, the human side is incredibly compressed. It shows a real lack of maybe resolution in how the human dimension is treated in this literature.
That compression is a really key finding that it highlights the imbalance in a different way.
It does. Now, what about change over time? They looked at trends across the 26 years. Which topics were getting hotter, meaning more research interest, and which were cooling off?
Okay, yeah. Did things get better? Did the human side get more attention later on?
Well, yes and no. The hottest topics, the ones with increasing publication rates, did include fisheries management.
Ah, so interest did grow in the human dimension topic.
It did. In fact, fisheries management was one of the coldest topics back in the early 90s, but it became one of the hottest by the end of the period, so there was a definite shift.
That suggests the field did recognize, perhaps, that management was a problem area.
Seems likely. But also gaining heat were topics like conservation, models, and fishing gear. So the management interest grew, but maybe still within that existing framework alongside the technical and biological focuses.
Interesting. What about the coldest topics? What lost favor?
The topic with the steepest decline was primary production. That's fundamental ecological stuff, the base of the food web. It was actually the most prevalent topic overall from 1990 to 2005, but interest clearly dropped off after that.
Fashions change in science, too, I guess. Was there anything else striking in the trends?
One other disconnect they pointed out was about the actual species studied. You'd think the research would focus on the most commercially important fish, right?
Yeah, the ones that feed millions or drive huge economies.
Well, the analysis found that salmonids, so salmon and trout, were the most frequently studied group in this literature. But species that are vastly more important in terms of global catch volume and economics, like, say, anchoveta or Alaska pollock or tilapia, they weren't prominent keywords in any of the 25 topics.
That is weird. So a potential mismatch between academic focus and global fishery importance.
It seems so. Maybe due to where the research institutions are located or funding priorities or just historical momentum. But it's another aspect of that potential narrow lens.
Okay, so summing up the implications. The so what of all this, it really comes back to that SECUS idea, the socio-ecological system.
Right. If you persist with this incredibly unbalanced research focus, maybe 20-plus topics on the E and only one very compressed topic for the S, you simply cannot get a good handle on how the whole system works, especially stakeholder behavior.
And if you don't understand the behavior, your management plans are likely to fail.
Leading to unforeseen outcomes, often undesirable ones, and ultimately contributing to the ongoing problem of unsustainable fisheries. The research imbalance, they argue, directly links to management failure.
Because policy, based on incomplete science, is unlikely to work in the messy, real world of people and money and rules.
Yeah. Precisely. You can have the most elegant stock assessment model in the world, but if it doesn't account for how fishers will react to it, or whether the enforcement agency has the resources to monitor it, or the cultural context, it's built on shaky ground.
So what do they recommend? How do we fix this narrow lens?
They offer two main prescriptions, pretty clear ones. First is diversification of focus. Fisheries science has to break out of that single fisheries management bucket for the human side, meaning dedicated research effort on specific aspects like institutional deep dives, enforcement, compliance, governance structures, social aspects, gender roles in fishing communities, social networks, fisher welfare, human agency, economic aspects beyond simple bioeconomics, poverty traps, pathways to innovation, and cultural aspects, traditional ecological knowledge, ethical considerations, what they even call blue humanities.
So basically bringing in the full spectrum of social sciences to bear on fisheries.
Yes, and integrating it properly. The second recommendation is about strategic publication.
When the research gets published.
Exactly. If the goal is actually to improve management and sustainability, then publishing human dimension research only in those specialized biology-heavy fisheries journals might not be effective.
Because the policymakers or managers you need to reach might not be reading them.
Right. So researchers focusing on the human side should think strategically, publish in top interdisciplinary journals perhaps, or even in leading journals within sociology, economics, political science, anthropology, places where social science insights are expected and valued, and where decision makers might look.
Reach the audience that needs the information. Makes sense.
Now, we should also mention the authors are upfront about the limitations of their own study.
Okay, like what?
Well, LDA relies on word patterns, so it might not perfectly capture really radical shifts in terminology over 26 years. Also, remember that huge data set? It was only journal articles.
Ah, so it excluded books, book chapters, government reports.
Exactly, and that kind of gray literature or books, that's often where you find more qualitative research, more in-depth case studies, potentially more of the human dimension work, especially from non-natural scientists. So the picture from journals alone might be skewed.
Fair enough. It's a snapshot of the core journal literature. But even with those caveats, the main finding seems pretty robust.
I think so. What really stands out from analyzing decades of this specialized science is, yes, stock assessment, fishing gear design, and fisheries management are central pillars. Nobody denies that.
But they aren't enough on their own.
They're clearly not enough. Achieving sustainable fisheries, the analysis strongly suggests, demands more than just excellence within those pillars. It requires integrative research, connecting the dots.
Bridging that gap between the natural and the human dimensions that the study revealed.
Precisely. It's a powerful reminder, really, that just producing more science isn't the answer if it keeps going down the same narrow tracks. Without building much stronger connections, better networks across disciplines, we risk just repeating the management failures we've seen for decades.
Which brings us to the final thought, the provocative question for you, the listener.
Yeah, the question is this. We see the evidence for this imbalance. We understand intellectually, perhaps, that we need this integration between natural and social sciences for fisheries. But the way universities are structured, the way research funding often works, it still tends to favor the traditional siloed natural science approach.
Inertia is powerful.
Very. So the question for you to mull over is, how can we, meaning institutions, funding agencies, universities, even journals, how can we genuinely change the system to better reward, support, and actively promote the vital interdisciplinary synthesis that this kind of analysis shows is absolutely necessary for success? How do we make that integration happen in practice?